That's quite special, be able to do the introduction actually before 7 o'clock, but since our modest lecture space has filled up, I see no reason to wait, and after all, you didn't come to hear me. Yet, I will give a little introduction. In fact, before I start a little introduction, Luciana Parisi's lecture, for those of you who do not look at our website, has sadly been cancelled for good reasons. And we are in touch with her and will definitely invite her again in the coming semester or soon enough. And it's an honor, a pleasure to introduce Hernán Díaz Alonso to you tonight. Needless to say, certainly for those in the architecture class and those of you who know it, ever since 2001, the architecture class in Staedelschule has entertained a particular relationship to the American Architectural Academy. This has involved a number of schools, and very much thanks to our colleague Peter Trummer and his being at SCI-Arc, that has over the very last few years entailed a particular relationship to that school, as it has emerged as a hugely important and influential small institution. And that is one thing. And the other thing is, of course, well, two notes, in fact. One is, Hernán turns out to have also not that kind of relationship that we may have to SCI-Arc, but he certainly has a relationship to Staedelschule in the sense that he has been aware of it ever since he worked for Enrique Miralles. And Enrique Miralles, as you will know, he was a professor here and led the architecture class for a number of years before a tragic early passing. But Hernán has entertained a particular relationship to him, to his work, and for that reason, I suppose, he also knows about Staedelschule from way back. For the architecture class, it has entailed basically a very particular relationship to SCI-Arc. I am proud, in fact, to say that what goes on at SCI-Arc has also had an enormous importance, if not also direct influence on the kind of work and engagements that we do here. And that is also embodied in a number of people who have been visiting over the last few years. David Rui, Peter Testa, Devin Weiser, to mention three. Now, also a personal note about Hernán. I mean, Hernán has been in my notebook since, more or less, since I finished my architectural studies some time ago. And lo and behold, despite then the fact that I've been following him, his name and references and stories about him have come up in all different kinds of settings. It is only very recently that I then met him, and I've had the pleasure of spending now, of course, time with him here in Frankfurt, and I am both, like I said, honored, and it's been very exciting. Hernán is someone then who's been instrumental in bringing SCI-Arc to that mature position that it has today. He's a director, which means he's responsible for the academic program. He's also the CEO, which means that he's responsible for how money flows in and out of the school in Los Angeles. And like I've already implied, he's directing a program that counts a number of very important architects, thinkers, and theorists. Hernán studied architecture in Argentina, where he's from, and then went on to do a graduate master program or the graduate master program at Columbia University. At that time when everything digital came into architecture, much thanks to the program that Bernard Tschumi was responsible for at that school. He went on to work for Peter Eisman. That was relatively short, for a year, before Hernán founded his own practice, SCI-Arc, in 2001, and that has recently changed name to the HDA Creative Agency. Now, all of his work at SCI-Arc has been preceded, but also has run in parallel with a number of other academic engagements. I just list and mention a few. He taught at Columbia University, GSAPP from 2004 to 2011. He was the studio head professor for the excessive postgraduate, it was named excessive postgraduate program at the Angewandte in Wien. He's been a visiting professor with appointments at Yale University, amongst other places. At Yale, he's also held a Louis Kahn visiting assistant professorship in 2010, and the Eero Saarinen Professor of Architectural Design in 2015. For his work, he's won awards, which includes MoMA's PS1 Young Architects Program competition. That was all the way back in 2005. In 2012, Hernán received the honor of being named Educator of the Year by the Los Angeles chapter of the American Institute of Architects. 2013, AR+D Award for Emerging Architecture. And in 2013, he also received honorable mention in Progressive Architecture Awards for his design of the Thyssen-Bornemisza Pavilion or Museum in Patagonia, Argentina. His work, as you will become acquainted with tonight, if you don't already know it, has been exhibited in Venice, at the London Architectural Biennale, at the Archilab in Orleans, France, and it's been included in a number of exhibitions at places such as the MoMA in New York, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Art Institute in Chicago, the Max Center in Vienna. And all of that work that you will be presented with tonight, and presumably also other work, will appear in a forthcoming monograph that is being published by Thames and Hudson. Now, I think it's an easy take on Hernán's work would be to sort of hook up with it over the word or how it's been characterized as engaging with the grotesque. I think there's other dimensions to it beyond this. In fact, if you look at it today, and I know that is also a discursive position in part, but it witnesses, in short, an intense engagement with aesthetics, or as some have put it, an unapologetic engagement with aesthetics. And I think that is particular. It also means that I think to speak of it or to look at it and to think of it in terms of a style is also to large degree to miss the valuable contribution that the work has done to recent production. It's not to say that style is something that should be taken easy or that it's a second order or second-rate engagement with architecture. On the contrary. However, I believe that there are other qualities and an intense sensuousness to the work, and that it presents itself with a characteristic of difference to so much of recent production in architecture. And I think that is true whether one looks at some of the building proposals and competition entries that have been made, or whether these are the smaller objects, for instance, cutlery that he has designed. And Hernán, I look greatly forward to see the work as much as everyone here. Thank you so much for coming.
Johan, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the introduction. Can we turn off the light so these people can take a nap? Also because everything is black background. As Johan mentioned, this is a place, it's my first time in the school. It's my first time in Frankfurt. January, clearly not the best month to come to visit Frankfurt, but what the hell? And this is a place that it has a lot of connotation for me, from my admiration and devotion to Enric Mirage's work and his personality. So it's really, this was in my bucket list, let's say. Of all the places, this was one of the few that I have an interest in visit and be part of a conversation like this one. So it's with great pleasure that I'm here. So I'm going to show you a lot of images, so you don't pay attention to what I say. One lesson I learned a long time ago is nobody remembers what you say in the lectures. People remember about the pictures. So my theory is if you put a lot of them, whatever stupid thing you said, it will be easily forgotten. So it's a good tactic, but also have to do with my approach to things. In the office, it has to do with my, I have a very distracting mind, so I tend to do a lot of things, all of them bad. But if you do volume, eventually you camouflage the shortcomings and limitation of your own work. So it's a little bit of a journey. In many ways, the lecture is sort of parallel to the way that we're constructing the book that Johan mentioned that is coming out in the next couple of months. This is the old cover. Those are my teeth. They're not that bad compared with others I've seen. But what I want to talk is the work that we've done in the last 18 years or so in the office, focusing mostly in the most focusing the attention in the most recent work, even though I'll show you a lot of the old work too. And in a way, as you have mentioned, I'm very unapologetic about it, about my own interest. I'm a formalist, which for some weird reason in the world of architecture seems like a bad thing, but I don't know, some people, at least in the American context, to say it so openly is a problem. So I never believe in form follow function, and I don't have the time but to prove it, but if you want, I can prove it why form follow function is one of the big misguided ideas that we took from modernism. But I always interested in form follows form. I think that's what everybody wants to be an architect, and if not, that's why I wanted to be an architect, even though I talk about myself more as a designer than an architect. So these are, I will argue, critical shifts that have happened in the last 25 years or so, which it has been crucial for me in the development of architecture as we understand it today, but for sure it has been crucial in my own understanding of how my work has shaped in that context. So, Johan mentioned in the introduction about my interest and the grotesque and the horrific, different ways or alternative ways to produce beauty. If you're interested in the problem of form, you're interested in the problem of beauty, and you're interested in the problem of aesthetics, of course. But I think the grotesque and horrific is a good alternative, and in many ways has become the modus operandi if not all the projects in the office, which is almost start with a kind of a opposite side of where you want to end. I would argue that editing, to me, is way more important than composition, even though everything that you do in design, it requires composition. But I think because we're using animation software and all those things, editing has become a crucial shift. I think the historically notion of architecture process has collapsed into a much more loaded way that you have to preload what you do. So it's not so much that you used to do a plan, a section, the model, and so on. All that is collapsing. Technology, for me, is not a replaced craft, but it became a different form of craft. So one of my obsessions has become how you can have a sense of authorship within the kind of tools that were not generic. Many of the young architects in the room were confronted with different problems, but if you were part of almost the beginning of the computational process into architecture, that was a crucial thing. At the beginning, it was all process-driven. I've never been interested in process. Actually, I'm not going to show you much process, and actually, I'm not going to talk specifically about many of the projects itself, because in a way, all the projects are blended into another. And I think if you are interested in form, of course, historically and in many ways, geometry was, but I would argue that systems, a systematic thinking about that has remained a new it has became a different way to approach that. And the last one, if you had to pay attention to only two, the top and the bottom are the most important statements. One, I'm obsessed with image. I mean, image as a vehicle for the production of form, as a new form, as a different way to produce those things. So the other thing which I would like to claim very early in the argument is that, for my money, the most important things that computers or technology brought to the table, aside different way to design, productions, and so on, is the possibility to produce new coherencies. Because the way that these things are built to produce synthetic logics. So you can mix opposite arguments in a way that it was very unthinkable in the past, and maybe still is at the conceptual level, but that fascinates me. Like, to give you an example, since we are in Germany, it was unthinkable at some point that you will mix rational thinking with romanticism, or rational philosophy with romanticism. Computation allows you to do that, but at the same time, I would argue that architecture is incapable to produce anything new. At best, it can innovate and produce variation. So the weight of the discipline and the history is absolutely crucial. So this, for those of you are young in the audience, this is Keith Richards, the guitar player of the Rolling Stones, a really cool dude. But what always interests me about the sound of the Stones is, if you really think about it, is basically was a mutation of blues. And it also was mutation, but the technology and the limitations on the technique. So it's not really that the Rolling Stones created a completely new sound, but they mutated enough that became a whole thing by itself. So mutation, contamination, species, degeneration, these are words you're going to hear me say a lot in the presentation. So we don't have audio, right? Doesn't matter. I'm just checking because some of them are loud. But it will be important maybe down the road. Not right now. But if you can turn it on at some point, appreciate it. So part of this thing with the image and this obsession with animation software and so on, it has to do with, and I think everybody will relate to that, everything that we do is kind of autobiographical. So originally I wanted to be a filmmaker and not an architect, and it's a long story, but at that time in Argentina that possibility was not available, so I ended up going to architecture almost by accident. And in a way, when later in the 90s I became confronted with these possibilities of these new tools and technology, it was an interesting way to start to mirror these ambitions and these ideas into a way to start to operate. Oops, sorry, my bad. Okay, so going back to now to go a little bit of short history of the work, representation to simulation has become crucial for me. I would argue that even when you're doing a line drawing to the computer, that's not any longer a drawing, it's a simulation of something else. So representation to simulation is a crucial thing. Beauty to beautiful is a more interesting problem, but it's difficult to explain that clearly in English. It works way better in Spanish, the distinction between bello and bonito, which bonito is like a lower form of beauty. It's less academic, less prestigious, it's more contemporary. So I'm interested in beautiful more than beauty. And I know it's not quite right, but if you follow more or less the argument, that is important. And it has to do with what we recognize with beauty at any given time in history. So there are moments that there's a reason why as a society we accept certain things and others. So early on in the work, this is 2005, this is a competition for the Untitled Tower in Dublin, Ireland. These are a series of projects of that time. In many ways, we were following what the tools were dictating us. So in that sense, I would argue that the work was very much in partnership, and at that time I would accept the term experimental. I would not say that the work was speculative because we were not knowing exactly what we were doing, but there was a kind of following single surfaces and all that, with everybody was one way or another to work on it. So when we got invited to compete for the Pavilion in the New York MoMA and the PS1 in 2005, it was the first time that we started to figure it out, our own way to start to think with my own kind of older ideas, how fragmentations and multiplicity. So at that time, when we did PS1, this was the first project we attempt to move away from the single surface and start to think in kind of a more genetic code or a singular form or a singular unit that you can mutate and transform. But it was also the first time that we start to experiment openly with the idea of animation and camera movement and time frame as a way to design and to think about this project. So when we presented to the jury, we presented the movie that you see now. This is 2005. And we didn't show any models or drawings until the very end. So we were talking about how the movie and how the project had ambition to have a cinematic experience and how the camera was not, this thing was not constructed to show it to them, but it was constructed as a way to think of the project, pretty much based in Alien, the first Alien of Ridley Scott, in which he never showed the monster until the end. So you cannot understand the totality of the project until the end. So it was an interesting experiment in that sense, and at that time, like we always do, I don't think we ever do competitions to win. We do competition to do what we are interested in doing. But this time we happened that we won it, and then you had 2 months to build it. And it was one of the things that said, what the hell? Why we did this? So anyway, we won it. We had to build it, so we did a 3D print model. This is the pavilion built one day before the opening. And there was a couple of things that happened about this that was interesting. And as I was mentioned earlier, I'm really interested in the idea of multiple projects at the same time. I don't never work in a single project, I'm multi into one. And I also very interested in the idea of autopsy as a way to work. And this is something I stole directly from Enrique Mirages, and I think I recommend to you guys to learn from previous people, they're smarter people than you, and steal whatever you can steal and mutate it and make it your own. And Enrique have always this idea that the end of the previous project was the beginning of the next one. So you develop the notion of autopsies. This is almost 1,500 pieces of structure. They're all different, which is a completely idiotic thing to do. This is the moment when you confront it with this and say, what the hell, I'm not a minimalist. You start to think about there is a benefit in doing glass boxes. But anyway, we didn't know what we were doing. But the two things that were interesting in that picture I show you when it was empty without people was that I start to send it away, and this is before text message or whatever, so there were emails with the images, and the images were not high res like they're today you can send. And a bunch of people sent it to me and said, oh, great photo montage. And it was an interesting idea, that it was the real thing, but it gave me this notion that there is a parallel reality, that there is a quality in the image itself in which, in many ways, the thing built, it was not really a thing built, but it was a kind of a fake representation of something that exists in a parallel dimension. So I've never been so interested in this kind of augmented reality or alternative, but I'm much more interested in the idea of alternative realities and parallel things in which the real thing becomes a fake thing and the real one is the other one. So it started to trigger a whole series of speculations. The other thing that was interesting is those red benches, they were manufactured. This was a combination of analog and digital thing. Those red benches were manufactured in Los Angeles in the dry weather, and we accelerated the process. It was injected mold and so on, and we painted in a car painting shop. So we take it to New York, and New York is humid and so on, and the whole thing didn't set up. We didn't wait for the material to stabilize. So when they got there in New York, they started to develop bubbles in the paint. And the guy who fabricated, I literally walked in and he was crying. And I look at them and said, that's pretty cool. The bubbles are kind of grotesque, and it's an interesting thing. So already at that time, I'd done a couple of lectures and talks here and there, then people knew I was talking about grotesque and horrific. So at that time, Nikolai Yurosov, who was the critic of the New York Times, came to do a report on the piece, and he interviewed me. Hey, this bubble, you guys did it on purpose because you into the grotesque. I said, yes, of course. Of course we did it, but it was interesting because we took, next year, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art invited us to do a solo show, and because we have a speculative practice and we don't get that many clients, so every time the museum invites us to do an architecture installation, we always push, or exhibition, we always push them to let us build something and not just show models and drawings or whatever. So in this case, the show was called Sangre, which means blood in Spanish, and again, it was a combination of digital and analog. So we built a lot of this part with milling machines, but then you had to sand it by hand. And the show was a kind of not a pedagogical show. It was non-process show. It was more about the logic. So this was the whole cells of the different projects that we done over the years, and there was a whole series of animation that show how they grow and mutate. And then we built this display, and we put the models. And in this case, we did the material acceleration on purpose. So the grotesque and change and imperfection start to play, which I think at that time I didn't know, but it was kind of the beginning, which I would say is my current interest, and I think the many interests in terms of what is a digital practice as a whole today. This was a second version of this in the Art Institute in Chicago, that we break it into different pieces and so on. But what I think it was interesting is that was the beginning, which I will call the moment of agents of contamination, which I'll come back in a minute. Right after the SF MoMA, we were invited by Peter Nover to do this show at the MAC. He had this beautiful program in which he would invite like a big name architect to do a massive show, and then there would be a small gallery for a younger architect to do it. So Greg Lynn did it with Zaha Hadid, I did it with Wolf Prick's big show. And this was a long tunnel, so we decided, unlike in PS1, that what we wanted to do was that the pieces will capture the animation. So in a way, we did a series of 16, 17, we call it spiders, of these objects. But this was when we start to play in a much more conscious way about the notion of corruption and mutations on the species. So this one, unlike PS1, that was built on a precise geometry, this was built of a kind of anamorphic thing, and this was one of the first projects that we used using dynamic and particle systems, so we reverse engineer on the form. But also we learned a couple of things along the way. One was that, unlike in PS1, this is what we manufactured, what we did was all the pieces were the same and the legs were the same, but if you rotate it enough, it will create this effect of movement, so how the people will move around and so on. And in many ways, the other thing which is interesting, which that's why I call myself more a designer than an architect, we flirt with art, we flirt with fashion, we flirt with production design, with product designs, but at the end of the day, you realize that you think like an architect, because an artist will never make these things out of these many pieces, and assembly, you will not think in tectonics and so on. So they're kind of ridiculous, overly complex in a stupid way. So, which I always think that's a way that you realize that you're really more in the architectural thinking mind than artistic mindset. Even though they are artistic scale and they have artistic effects, this is one of the few things that I've done that over the years I still like it. And most of the other things I do, I hate it the day it's done. But this one I still, for some reason, I still enjoy it. But also start to create the opportunity in which, again, the notion of the physicality and the virtuality of the animation and so on, to start to have a more dynamic relationship. And there was an interesting mutation of that. A year and a half ago, they opened a new museum of 3D print in Shanghai. And they asked us not to do a show again, but they asked us if we will sell them the file, the copyrights of the file of the show in Vienna to reproduce it in China. And I said, okay. I asked for a number. It was a pretty good number. They said yes. So the only thing we sent was a 3D file. And then they invited me 3 months later to the opening, and they did this. They changed in scale and different displays and so on. And it was an interesting thing because it was fun, but also start to go with this thing. I've been talking about the idea of going from architectural thinking. There is a whole world that's operating in which the design, copyright, what remains authorship, and so on is a much more blurred territory. And I think it's an interesting way to think about it. I really don't have any conclusion or any sophisticated thought to say about it. I just say, for those of you who are young, you have to start to think about in different terms how the thing is going to play out, and it's changing in a way that is strange. The other sad thing I have to say about the Austrian version is half of the spiders the MAC kept. The other half, I sold it to the Thyssen-Bornemisza, to Francesca von Hartog, which is an art collector. And when Peter Nover did the introduction, he whispered to my ear and said, tell her that it's art, it's not architecture. And they pay way more than if it was architecture. So I'm just saying, learn tricks along the way. In parallel to that, and this is what, at that time is when we start to work what I call families of projects. So if you look at the very original cell of this thing, it's the same than the Mac, we were invited to do a small competition for a guest house for an art collector outside Paris, Natalie Ceruzzi. She wanted to have a guest house for artists. She has a beautiful house done by Claude Parent with collections from art pieces of Andrew Bloch in the garden. So she wanted to do a guest house. She invited five firms. And we did this. And unlike, and this one again, is kind of it's always like a basic equation. So in this one is some of the principle of PS1 mixed with some of the principle of the back piece, but trying to become a house. So it looks like it's complex, which it is, but it's only 3 different cells. So the rest is just tubes and connectors. But again, we get more and more into the rabbit hole with the issue of animation, the issue of cinematic thing and time-based design. So to a point that actually in our office we don't make physical models. We only do models when somebody wants it for a collection or the client wants it and so on. We work all in the computer. I don't sketch. We don't have, there are no pencils or paper around in the office. It's like a boring thing, like when people come say, can we visit your office? I say, sure, but it's just a space with computers. So you want to come and see a space with computer, you're welcome. But it looks like any computer lab. But this also became like a kind of a commitment to the now. I was mentioned today in a conversation that I'm obsessed with the now. I'm not so interested in the past. I'm not so interested in the future. I'm interested in now. That doesn't mean that you discard historical value or understand the discipline, but I'm not interested to be paralyzed by that. I'm not interested in that the work will be considered disciplinary. I'm totally fine that the architects don't accept me as an architect and the artists don't accept me as an artist and the production designer don't accept me as and so on and so forth. It's totally fine by me. So around the same families, the Art Institute asked us, commissioned us to do a chair, and we were playing around at the time. It was one of the first projects that we were doing coding. This is not the render, this is the real thing. We took the IMS chair and we literally infected with the code, and we mutated into this. We did it in 48 hours. And it happens that we fabricated and we put it in the show. I hate that piece. So one lesson I learned is you don't get to choose which one will happen. So pay attention to all of them, because the one that you love usually don't happen, and the one that you hate sometimes happens. So treat them all equally. But anyway, we did a chair or whatever. So, but that chair brought Alessi to the table, and this was the first product line that we developed for them. None of them became part of the market, but it was a lot of fun. And at that time, I was under the delusion that product design maybe is faster than architecture. It's not. It takes as long as architecture takes in terms of process and so on, and you don't make way more money than you do with architecture. But it's fun. So this was the first one, Mutant Manners, a tableware collection that we did for Alessi. That after that we did an installation proposal for Suffragette, the department store in London. So as the work progressed, this is when I will say you start to build a discourse. I've never been so interested in the idea of theory so much about my own work. But I've always been interested in the work that we produce in the office, to have a discourse, because also it's important when your team, even though I never have a bigger team beyond 8 people in the office, and then at some point, it's part of how you start to communicate that also have the symbiotic relation with teaching. Like to me, SCI-Arc has been a crucial part of my life for many reasons, but also because I think between the work we do in the office and what I'm done as a teacher there and other schools, but mostly in SCI-Arc, it's a symbiotic relation, and I really think at least all the people that I admire, they've always been involved in academia and teaching, because it's a way to keep thinking, and also it forces you to build a discourse, and it forces you to start to articulate what you're trying to do. So I mentioned before agents of contamination, so I was trying to organize the book. These were the 6 categories that I would say some of them came and went, but some of them remain stable. So in the early period, like everybody else, I was very interested in biological process. As I always said, architecture is a weak discipline in a good way. Like we like to borrow from other disciplines all the time. We borrow ideas and structures. So when computers came on the tables, the most viable thing was to use pseudo-scientific arguments because it was quasi-scientific. And I think then we are, and still I think we are in that period, people like myself and many of my colleagues and younger colleagues, we are what I call it the era of contamination. Everybody's throwing other factors into these things to see what else we can do to reclaim a sense of humanism, a sense of individuality into these territories. So then I would say from 2005 to 2012, we have an interest in ornament. Then we move into cinematic effects. That hasn't gone away. Artificial nature is a more recent thing. Rituals and butchery has been a much more recent but obsessive, compulsive way to understand these things. But it's important to me to think in terms of agents of contamination, because another thing I was mentioned this afternoon was the idea of the sponge. I like to think architects and designers, we should be like a sponge. We absorb things and then we just squeeze and become something else. So I'm always paying attention to other things. I have interest in, as I said, in the now. So that means I'm looking a lot into films, into popular culture. So I'm very interested in that idea. But the other thing you will realize as the work progresses is all these different eras of agents and contamination, it doesn't abandon the previous one. I have zero capacity to editing things out. So every new idea that we have, it piles on the previous, and piles on the previous, and it piles. So it becomes at some moment ridiculous, but that's what it is. This project is a project that I find kind of there are certain projects that I consider benchmarks in the work because it disrupts the trajectory of how we were thinking. This was a competition in the north of Spain for a media art museum, but part of the thing was you need to keep an existing old building. And it was an interesting thing because it was the first time that we were confronted to work with our formal language in relation to an existing Cartesian language. And it became an interesting experiment, but also I rediscovered my fetishes on an obsession with plans that come from mirages. And I really think you can divide pretty much all the architects in plan architects or section architects, even though right now we are in an MRI era versus X-rays. I'm certainly a plan architect. I like plans. I always like sections to be just a byproduct of plans. As you can see, the sections are always terrible in the project. But very few, I think, manage to do too. But the truth is, the plans and sections are not relevant. They're not driving the project anymore. They're just pieces of information. They are MRIs. They're not X-rays. So we build in the three-dimensionality, and then we produce the things that we need to produce. So in parallel to that museum in Spain, we were working in our second collection for Alessi, Mutant Manners 2. These were done for a particular line that they have. It's called Officina Alessi, which are objects that are really done for people who collect stuff. They're not really expected to be very functional, clearly. But this one also was an interest that if you will use this, you will have to eat like this or something. So you will have to negotiate the space with the next guy. So I thought there was an interesting idea of Mutant Manners. So it didn't fly because it was too complex to manufacture, but now some version of this is back to life in China, and now we want to do it in plastic and chrome them, so it will look like, it's like, we call it a cheap luxury line. And we want, the whole game is, well, the guy who's paying for it, he wants to sell it to first-class airlines, Chinese things. So it will be plastic thing that they give in the plane. We did the glasses, I don't know what else we did. Trays, ashtray, cigar cutter. This was a mutation of that when we tried to make it simple and work with a single metal sheet. This was a candle holder. So, but I like it because you stick the candles on the things and then the wax will get into the silver thing and it will get a little bit nasty. Some competition that I don't know why this project is still here. So the installation became more and more part of the game. The MAC in Los Angeles invited us to do an installation in one of the in the Mackey apartments of Schindler. There are 5 garages, and so each of the guests was invited to take over a garage. So we came with this idea to do a whole dynamic particle things that we assign to each point a flower. So we build this kind of a structure of flowers, and then we'll, like always, I said, okay, how are we going to build this thing? So I went to the flower market in Los Angeles and hired 3 ladies, phenomenal ladies, that they do funeral arrangements. So they know how to do So they come with a metal thing that hold them. So the idea for the exhibition, you have these flowers, the show will be up for 3 months in the summer in LA. So over the days, the floor will dry, it start to smell like a cemetery, and eventually all the bubbles with the monitors will collapse, and the whole thing collapsed. So it was the first time we tried to work in the physical world, the idea of decay, that we were obsessed with this contamination that we're trying to put into the computer territory. But the other thing that the flower came to play, this was the first version for the Thyssen-Bornemisza Pavilion in Patagonia. The other thing that flowers became interesting because we were doing with ornament and all that. As I mentioned earlier, I think architects, some architects are terrible with colors. I don't know how to work with colors. So I thought it was a really cool idea to use our convoluted ornament and allow two plants to grow. So it will give it also the possibility that the project change over time, but also it was kind of a way to make it a little bit less perfect, start to make it a little bit more dirty in a way. So we did a whole series of what we call rose chairs for the same client, the commission, the house in the competition for the house in Paris. So we did this one, and the idea is this is a mesh that is very unstable. It's a chair that you will be afraid to sit on it. And then we did a bench version of that. But this was a moment in which this notion and cowhide and the literal start to show some teeth in the whole argument. Literally. But what I find it interesting when we start to flirt with flowers and all that was that it will bring a sense of humanity and imperfection, but it made me think, like, in many ways, if we think of the Renaissance as a great moment in architecture and all that, there was an obsession that came from that time in architecture that there was a desire to create perfection out of imperfect things, imperfect techniques. And I think one of the issues that computer brought to the table is this idea that this perfect mathematical equation, so literally the geometry and the thing that you can generate in a computer, they are mathematically perfect. I mean, it's not like us, they can computate millions and millions of variations. So I think, at least personally, but I think many people are obsessed with this idea, can we produce imperfection out of this perfection? So it's kind of a flip. So that's what I'm saying, it's not really new, you just take opposite and flip it. So, but it brought me to another interesting thing, which is the idea as a form, and I'm always looking for new ways to challenge myself, just to entertain myself. This doesn't have any kind of intellectual aspirations. It's just to keep myself going and to keep the people in the office going, is that the form always operates in relation to the abstract. So I was thinking, what if we borrow from the art that they take the literal many times? And I'm thinking in Klaus Oldenburg, but many others artists, that they do the literal thing, which is kind of a silly thing, but at the same time, it's a super interesting concept. So I really became very obsessed with literal, which I would argue in many ways still define the work that we do in the office. And in this case, and this was around a little bit when I had my first daughter, and I've been living outside Argentina for 20 and something years. But somehow I feel like some kind of a misconstructed nationalism. And I start to revisit the fake sense of culture, because Argentina is really an European country by influence. So unlike Mexico and Peru, that they have a phenomenal local culture, our local culture is very limited. So it all comes to cow and meat. So I was very interested in cows and animalization of things. So this is the second version of the Thyssen-Bornemisza Pavilion in Patagonia, in which, we take it too far with the little thing. But the idea also was that it was done in certain parts that if they don't finish it, it will be okay. So they have a lot of components and interesting things, potential interesting thing that they didn't need the full completion. The other thing which is I stole from Mirages was the idea that Enrico always says that the buildings are always better when they're incomplete, that the buildings and constructions are always better than finished. So I always thought that his work had that desire, that all the buildings in Enrico always look like and keep continue. They're always like open systems. So that's something it fascinates me a lot. But also in this one, if you notice, it's the first time we start to do really kind of borderline surreal rendering. So the renders are a little bit more dirty and not so perfect. So we put Argentinian barbecues in it. So it goes without saying that the project didn't come to fruition. But it was an interesting experiment to figure it out how to do that. So we decided to take a step further, and at that time we were trying to work with Jeff Kipnis in this meat sculpture. And I spent a whole amount of time with myself and the students and people in the office studying butcheries. And there are so many options from the Argentinian butchery versus the British versus the Australian versus Asia. So many forms of butchery. It's fascinating. But it's great because it has this kind of ritualistic thing. So it's low-end, high-end. Most of the rituals mix something sophisticated with something primitive and brutal, which I find it really interesting. But also, butchery is about cutting and manipulating 3D. So it's a really cool way to rethink cuts and sections for a computer. So I spent a lot of time. So anyway, we came with this proposal. We figured it out. We can put the milling machine outside in the cold in Kentucky in the winter, so we can frozen the meat and mill it. And then anodize it with metal and so on. So we figured it out, not all of it, but quite a lot. And in the end, the show didn't happen because the Protection Animal Agency was opposing and trying to explain that the cows were already dead, that we were not killing them, that we were buying meat. But anyway, it didn't happen. But also it triggers a whole series of families of projects on this animalization the cow movement in architecture. That was basically just two of us, me and Jason Payne. Jason Payne was also interested in cowhide, so there was a moment that there was a cow movement in architecture with two leaders and two followers, just the two of us. But this one was a porcelain lamp for a Limoges company in Limoges in France. They are for kids, they are this size. The company got sold, whatever, but the project is back on action, so we're fabricating the two prototypes, and they're going to be for my daughters. And they're like little cows. At that version, somebody saw in a lecture, and we got a very weird phone call, like 2 weeks after the lecture. And there was this guy in Austria, of all places. Those of you who know Austria, you know that perversion in Austria runs high. Probably it's 200 years of psychoanalysis will do that to you. I've been in therapy for many, so I know what I'm talking about. So a guy who has an amazing collection of sadomasochist art wanted to have a chandelier. So we went with this. Unfortunately, the guy died. Not because of this. He just died. So his widow didn't want the chandelier anymore. But it was to be all in porcelain, and they have all these things. And anyway, it was fun. Out of that family of little cars, we went a little bit more abstract because you can never escape abstraction. I mean, you have to understand some of the things that trigger in the conversation, they're always aspirational. I really believe that you can never be original completely as an architect, but you should try. You should try to be original. You can never be completely new, but that shouldn't stop you from trying. So I know I'm never going to be able to be literal, but that doesn't stop us from trying. So anyway, this was a remote control for JP Morgan Chase, one of the most powerful banks on earth. They have a high-end banking for very rich people in Los Angeles, and they wanted to have, the guy was a really cool guy who was at the board of SCI-Arc, and he commissioned a small project for many of us in SCI-Arc, and he commissioned us this remote control that you put inside, and you do it there, and it's for them to ring so somebody can bring them coffee or water. We did 10 of them, we 3D printed, we painted with them. It's fun, but the only thing I'd say also is depressing because we make way more money with this than we ever did with any other thing. They're like this, and we did it in 3 days. But banks, you guys are in Frankfurt, banks, just find how to do little things for them and charge them a lot. But it triggered a whole family of things. This was a series of coffee cups that we did for Alessi, big cup, a small cup, in porcelain. This is the mold of the metal thing we do it now in China. And again, we're going for the cheap luxury. So instead to do the porcelain thing that there was that, we're going to do a whole series of hard rubber. So this is a metal mold that they will cast and so on. So we're going to do this. I cannot talk much beyond that. But also that triggers us our first kind of artwork, art. This was a piece that Tom Main and Blythe, her wife, he wanted to have something, so we did a popcorn. So we took a little popcorn, we scan it, blow it up, put a little with ornament, painted silver, art. I love artists. You have to love artists. But again, it's part of the literal. But the other thing which is interesting about this is you realize that you start to build, and Johan mentioned that, I'm not afraid to use the word style. I have no problem with that. I don't know, for some reason architects always be afraid, but I don't buy for a second. I think every architect wants to have a signature, want to have a style. But the other thing which I will say, if you don't want to talk about style, you can start talking about the repertoire. You start to build the repertoire, you start to build your own alphabet, you start to build your own code, your own musical notes. So it became instrumental because as I have to be the director of the school and being all the time, so I'm not really that much in my office. So when you build the repertoire, the work over the years changed, because PS1, for example, we model it between two of us. I model it. I still do most of the animations and the renders. I don't let anybody touch that. But the other work I don't do anymore for many reasons. First, I'm not around enough. Second, everybody in the office is way better than me with the software by now, because this is the other thing. With age, your brain slows down. So when you build the repertoire, so Rachel, who runs the office and runs every project, we say, "Why you want to do that?" I say, "Okay, let's look at the cow, mix it with that ornament that we did in that project, mix it with this." So it becomes much more like almost like a virtual collage that you put in your head. So the repertoire became important. Part of the problem also is when you have, in my position, I have a speculative practice, that you don't get projects or clients for real. So I don't get to spend 4 or 5, 6 years in a project. So I keep changing too, because I don't have the opportunity to mature some of the ideas. So you keep changing. One will think that maybe when you look at the world, looks way more coherent than I think it is. But at the same time, Infonavit, which is the social housing organization in Mexico from the government, asked me to put together 10 architects to do like a $10,000 50 square meter houses for different parts of Mexico. So we proposed this. We were working in a region that they still do water tanks in wood. So what we proposed was a simple idea. What if we take 3 water tanks? You can open and close. And part of the goal was this house during the day need to be like a workshop for artisans or whatever, farming, whatever the families would do. The family had to build it themselves, so they had to know how to do it. So our proposal was simple. We take 3 water tanks. We talked to the company Patagonia, who does, sorry, not Patagonia, one of those companies who does clothes for mountains. And they were willing to play ball with us to help us with the fabric. It was a very nice part of Mexico, nice weather. So the idea was to have this kind of a semi-temporary thing. In the parallel, at the same time that we were doing this luxurious ashes urn. This is a rich old man who's planning his own death. So he wanted to have a nice ashes urn. So we did this with flowers embedded and so on. He's still alive. So we haven't manufactured them. And he wanted his wife to keep it somewhere in the living room. So we did a version for her too. She's old too. Not that common in LA. Rich guys tend to be in their 4th or 5th marriage with much younger women. This is not the case. They're both old. Anyway. So this idea of butchering, carrying the literal took a different step or a different mutation when we did this competition for a theater in Bogota, in Colombia. And it was a tricky project for me because it was not a free-form standing thing. So this was a project that the whole program had to fit in the whole footprint of the site. It's in the old part of Colombia. So what we did was, well, okay, let's do true butchering and carving mutation of that. So we fill it with the thing, okay, in Latin America, they like glass boxes a lot. That's what they think is contemporary. So they say okay, let's do what is the technical word I'm looking for? A fucking glass box. And let's carve in the front an interesting courtyard. So we will have this kind of a monstrosity, beautiful thing waiting for you in the inside, and you can see it here better. So the render is deceiving because it shows, of course, the monstrosity much more evident that the project itself was. So in the real idea was from outside you only will see the corner, this monster coming on view. Again, going back to some of the old ideas of the first Ridley Scott, the first alien Ridley Scott. Around the time, Willy Muller, who was running the Barcelona regional agency, commissioned us to do a pedestrian bridge that connects Barcelona with San Adrià de Besòs, which is a town next to, and there's a small river. It's not really, it has a bridge component, but also has a platform in ecological reserve. And this one, it had a certain series of limitations that came with budgets and so on, and we worked with Klaus Bollinger and his firm in this. So we went back to some of the older ideas in PS1, and also we went back and revisited, like I always do, Enrique Mirages and his mastery and working in geometries and tubes. We tried to figure it out. How can we build something can we produce something very dynamic that produces effect that is, everything is different, but at the end of the day, we tried to come with a system. So the idea was that it will be like an elevated garden. So you can cross the river, but also you can go to kind of the ecological reserve part and look at the birds and all the things that it's supposed to have. But then we can put these balls, chrome balls, glass balls that inside will have a species in danger of disappearing. So it was a whole series of ideas. And of course, you can see ornament, you can see the flowers. So everything that we develop always come back. So in a way, I always think you always work in the same project. You just add new contaminations, but in many ways, I don't have that many ideas. When I have a thing that I throw on it, actually, I don't like that much big ideas. I always think that very complex ideas at the beginning get on the way, and then the project can never live up to the expectations of those ideas. So actually, I like projects that start with simple ideas. That's what probably I think I like so much the literal. That's why I tend to like virtuosity over conceptual. Like I prefer Francis Bacon to Marcel Duchamp, because Bacon was just a painter, was doing painting, old painting in the tradition, no great idea, but extraordinary result. That's why I'm way more fan of Frank Gehry, let's say, than Rem Koolhaas, even though I think Rem Koolhaas is a brilliant mind and a brilliant architect. I always think his concepts are way more interesting than his building for my money. And Frank's ideas are actually very straightforward and clear, but the results is, so I'm more in that camp, and I'm not arguing that one is better than the other. I'm just saying it's understanding yourself and your own interest. So anyway, we developed this project quite a lot. We were very close to start the last part of it when they lost the election. So the party was out of power. The new director, of course, didn't want to follow with the project, which is very common in public projects. So this is what I was talking about. This is what we developed with Klaus Bollinger. The idea that at the end there was only 3 different systems in play, so you can rotate, move them, and so on. I'm not going to say it was a low budget, but it was not a ridiculous high budget. And the idea we need to figure out how to be efficient about it. And I think we bring it within plus minus 10%. They asked me to do a park on the landing, but we knowing that we will never get built, but they need it for the master plan. So we proposed this park mix of it was kind of a mix between Gaudí, Mirages, and skateboards of Los Angeles, skateboard things. The other project that the regional agency of Barcelona commissioned, that was another cross, in this case the zoo to the Barceloneta. And in this case we went full on to do an elevated park more than a bridge. So in this case, with the idea, and this is one of the first projects, we start to flirt with artificial nature or natural artificial, so start to play with those things and the idea that you can do those things. So that project died, but it took a second life if you look at that little part, that part became the skeleton for this other project that the Infonavit in Mexico commissioned to us. Originally, actually, they commissioned to us 3 small parks. In the Jojutla is in the periphery of Mexico, And I convinced them to say, can we pack all the budget into one thing? It was 2 little parks and a little bridge, and said, can we do an elevated plaza bridge and put all the budget into one thing? So we come with this proposal. There was this kind of elevated plaza that would allow you to cross from one side to the other of the neighborhood every day in a different way if you choose to do so. Again, this is my mistake to think that my own behavior will apply to other people. Like, I never go to the same place using the same road. So I like to change every time. So I always thought it's an interesting idea. I always think bridges are boring. Just give you one option, that. So I said, bridge. And in this particular case, the idea was, what if we create like a civic space that is elevated, they don't have a plaza and so on. So we create a lot of extra unnecessary space in the traditional thing. I really like the idea. Somebody in Innsbruck, there's a student who has been doing it for a long time, asking everybody who to Innsbruck. They ask you, what is architecture? And they're really good answers, so you guys should check it. You should check it when you have a time. There is, I don't know, like 50 architects by now that they respond, and they're all interesting ones. One of my favorites is Wolf Prix, and he said, what is architecture? He said, yes. That's his answer. Mine was one that I don't even remember how I learned that one, but is architecture is a genius solution to a non-existing problem. And I believe that, because if you really think about what inspires and makes architecture great or not, it has nothing to do with utilitarian things and things. Of course, you have to make sure that the door open and people can go in, and if you're in an auditorium, people can listen, and if you're in a museum, that people can see the art. It goes without saying. But that's not the fundamental thing. It's the other pluses that you can incorporate. So the idea was this, that this can become a civic space, not just a bridge. They can have quinceañera parties, they can have meetings, they can have photographies for weddings. I mean, if you guys ever been in Yokohama, the one that Alejandro Sarapol and Farshid Mosavi built, the interior is a little bit, they couldn't do it, but the roof is used a lot as a civic space, and it's the place for destination for wedding pictures and so on. So we thought it was a good idea to do that. We just finished the CD, the construction documents, and now we are trying to figure it out how we're going to start to put in place. Originally it was all wood, then we start to add much more metal mesh. Believe it or not, in Mexico, metal is way cheaper than wood. So, but we wanted to keep the wood part. So this is some of the drawings that we sent to them. And if those of you who are connoisseurs, you can see a lot of the influence of Enrique back into play. Anyway, this is the same animation. So we'll see what happens. We are in the middle of that. Before that, we did a competition for the Central Library in Helsinki. It was one of the few times, very strange, in these Nordic countries, very civilized people, very democratic and so on. Before the jury have a competition to do an exhibition, they let the people to go and come and vote. We came in second. The people like it. The jury didn't. Sorry to say, with a fellow Nordic countryman in town, never do competitions in the Nordic countries. Always the guy who wins is the guy who lives 2 blocks away from the site. So they do international competition. That doesn't mean we shouldn't win, no. But in this one was one of the few ones that we really flirted with the idea of program a little bit. So as you know, it's very cold up there. So we thought, and you had to do a box, fill the box. So we did a box, but we did a box with pimples. It's like a teenager box. It's full of... But what we did is, in the box is not the library. In the box is a public park, so they can use all the year. And the library happens in the Fabergé X, as we call it, because nobody goes to libraries to read books anymore. There are civic spaces, so we went for that. Anyway, oh, no, we're not going to see that again. Sorry. Now you can see the plans, renders, whatever. Another project that we worked with Infonavit, this was an idea for emergency houses after earthquakes and so on. So our proposal was very simple. You can create 21 square meter concrete block with a kitchen and the house, and the rest could be a tent that you can assemble big or small. All the pieces are the same, all the fabric is the same, but instead to look like a chest, like a refugee camp, it will give you different character, because as those who are with Latin America, we know that temporary things became permanent solutions for 4 or 5, 6 years. So we thought that to propose that. They're still thinking about doing a prototype and since it's viable. Back on the literal and the bubbles and so on, a company in Italy commissioned us to do a lamp. So we play around with this version, the idea of a light bubble that you can melt into each other. So this was the first version. But the second version became this, and we said, instead to do a lamp, can we just do a light bulb? So we can do this cool thing melted, sell it in whatever, in Target, in cheap places. So you don't need to buy a lamp, you just buy the light feature, you plug it into your existing thing, and you have this thing, and they have LEDs inside. Didn't happen. The same company commissioned us to do a flower base that it will not require flowers, so you can have it. And that, one way or another, trigger a more recent development. Johan mentioned that we changed the name of the company, first of all, because the first name was ridiculous and now I can't pronounce it. And I hung it to it for too long. It was a stupid idea that I put in '98. And then I was too lazy to change the website and all that. But we changed it to just my name, HDA, Hernán Díaz Alonso Creative Agency, because we start to flirt more and more with other things. This is part of a company that we developed in China that's going to focus in what we call augmented fashion. It's not traditional fashion, it's a fashion focused in healthcare. The idea is to produce products that could be cool looking and weird and so on. And this was not our idea. This came from one of the investors that they said we should focus on this. So we are in the process now to build the prototypes. And the idea is to find then fashion company who want to collaborate with us and not create a full-fledged company. This is a pollution mask. Now we're trying to figure out the sensor. So the idea is if your mask is too dark, the pollution is very bad. So you also produce like a public service to other people, and it can connect to your app and so on. And then if the pollution gets better, it change colors. But I was thinking it also you can tell the mood, so you can tell to other people. I mean, because nobody can see you smile or sad, so you can you say I'm happy or not? So I like those silly ideas. So these are the pollution masks. What else we have? This is not so much healthcare, but it's augmented fashion. These are just buttons. So you can have like a cheap jacket, and you can spend some money in buttons and have like a cool buttons that you put in your jacket. And also, like in the family thing, this splash thing, also zippers, more zippers. And earplugs, this is not for music. I suffer from tinnitus. I have it for years now. I have 24/7 permanent ringing in my ears, like a fluorescent light. Bzzz. Eventually, you start paying attention, but I have to always carry. I have it with me, earplugs, because if I'm in a loud place, I have to put it in to protect it doesn't get worse. That's maybe some of the reason why my work is like that, because I have this bzzz all the time. So, but they're always kind of boring and ugly. So I thought, well, what if we make that into jewelry? More variations of that, more variations of that. The ring sacks. These are for people who have pacemakers and defibrillators. You have to have a couple of sensors outside. They're always ugly. My father used to have one. So I thought, can you have one that you can put it here and show it? Like it's cool. Like I have these things. This is the first version of a coat that then evolved into a vest and different variations of it, in which you can put your oxygen tank in it, but also you have to have a colonoscopy bag. You can blend into it. These are things that people feel very humiliated, and I always thought it's a way to celebrate that you're unique, and it's a way, as you know, the state of your mind is crucial to beat any illness. So I always think if you say, okay, yeah, I have a colonoscopy, fuck you. I celebrate it. It's who I am. It's what I have to live with it, and so on. This is a famous company that I cannot mention. It's a shoe that we're doing. We'll see what happens or not. I don't know if it will happen. But the idea is it will come with a lot of hair. And then we design the scissors, and there will be instruction how you can customize and give the hairdo that you want to your shoes. You can see the logo there, so don't take pictures of this and don't post it. They will fire me, so please don't. Another version of the best. And there you can see also you can have the thing in your nostrils so you can breathe. More versions of that. And this is the one that we're working right now, and I'm gonna make my family to test it. We're doing the prototype now. It's a collection called Sharpei chairs. I like Sharpeis a lot. They have much skin than they need. So we're trying to figure it out. There are different scenarios, but right now we're setting on this fabric thing that we can do a mold and plasterize it. So we're doing different versions. The one we're gonna go for is this one. And then we're gonna put hair on top, of course. I like hair. I like shiny things and hair and flowers. I'm like a fish. I like shiny things. This is not so good. This is called a chicken chair. It's for kids. It's disgusting. It's not going to look like that, but we thought it was funny to render like a chicken from the supermarket. It's going to be made in some fabric, but we thought it was cool. It's that small, that for kids. Some teapot, a park office in Shanghai, which the idea was to have an outside office. So it was not really a park, it's a working space, and people can work on the outside with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, blah, blah, blah. I have areas meetings, so it was a concept that we were pitching to a company. That project didn't happen, but that company is a big company. And they suggested that they were tired to hiring the same artists to put pieces in it. And so we started to think about land art. So we are playing around with these things. This is for a company in Canada for urban equipment. They have to be durable. So we're doing these versions of tables, trash cans, chairs. And this is one of my favorite projects. This is where we are working with a very interesting, crazy billionaire who is in a crusade to produce interesting, sustainable things. So we want to produce this bench. They can grow grass into it. So the idea is when you put in the park, you don't know what is nature, what is artificial. And so it doesn't look like grass yet, but it looks more like hair. But the idea that this will be grass. It's not going to move, but when you do animation, what not? Why not to create this parallel reality? Why not create this mutation and find clues about how things can keep moving forward? I'm totally in love with this thing. I want to do it so bad. To the point that now the project is on hold. I find some money and we're going to do it ourselves. And Saya doesn't have a garden, so I cannot put it in Saya, but I'll find somebody's garden I can put it. I love this little project. This was something that we did with Kopp Himmelblau. They were doing a gigantic master plan to expand one of the Chinese cities, so he asked me to do the flower district of towers. So we did this. They really don't look like flowers, clearly. But anyway, this is a very early, this is where we are working right now. It's an art center outside Chengdu, and it has to be done with local artisans. So we've really been looking into bamboo and trying to figure out that. So it's really a roof with a series of big baskets with a couple of chrome curtains, so it can use for the community. It's still very crude. We're still starting to figure it out as we move forward. Let's see, which one is this? This was a competition that we did for the Museum of Writing in Korea. It's a gigantic park. It's 3 times the size of Central Park in New York. And what we thought there was an interesting idea was, instead to do a museum, why we don't do a vertical forest or a vertical garden in which the museum is hidden inside. So the museum happened in those wood pieces, and the rest is a combination of artificial and natural materials. And these very interesting photovoltaic cells that they're plastic and flexible. So again, the notion is that all the perimeter of the museum is a public space that is an extension of the park, and then the museum is just some way hidden there. It's not really a good project, but it's basically setting the tone for where we are right now in the office, and what are the ideas on this mutation between artificial and nature and all those things. We did another Helsinki competition, so we don't learn. This one, I think every architect in the world did, the Guggenheim. And the other reason which this project, I think, it has value for me, not because it's good, because I don't think it is, but is because it also introduced the possibility about the notion of friction, permanent friction between vocabularies. And in this case, we look at the Guggenheim Bilbao of Frank Gehry, and we wanted to do the opposite. In Frank Gehry's Bilbao, the public space is when the Frank Gehry happens, and in the galleries are fairly gallery-like. So we wanted to do the opposite. Clearly, it was not a good idea, but we thought it was an interesting idea, in which the interior will be the gallery, which are all unconventional. Because, to be honest, I'm tired that architects, we need to be at the service of artists. I thought sometimes artists should catch up with architecture and figure it out, and this was really refreshing about, in the Hans Hollein building yesterday, I went to see, even though outside is ugly as hell, the interior is phenomenal because it's a really challenging space. And I have to say, the art looks better when there is this dialogue. So anyway, that was the ambition. So the perimeter is not completely a box, but it's much more orthogonal. So the public space will be kind of the more predictable one. And then the art exhibition space is what it will be really convoluted, which is, I can show you here the evolution of that. So the galleries inside, clearly, I mean, it will be kind of tough to hang paintings, but actually when you think about it, it's not so hard, because when you look at the curvature of the size of this, if you put the frame, at that moment, the curvature will not, anyway, and I don't want to get into that conversation. But in any case, it was also one of the, to really, it was the one that triggered to start to look in Booth and to look like a certain conventions of the literal, of the materiality, and not so be obsessed with artificial materials or more composite and so on. I would say I'm not so contemporary like my peers in the sense, I still think very much to assembly and tectonic. I'm not so interested in the evolution of those things like Greg Lynn, who's really trying to figure it out, how you get out of tectonic and composition of pieces and really to do single things. I'm not really good at it. I'm not really good with materials. I don't have a discourse of a position. I'm much more opportunistic. We come with the concepts and then we'll figure it out, what we can throw at that can make it more or less viable or credible. And I think that the last project is, and then if we can get sound after this, it will be fun. I don't know if the sound will be on. This was another competition in Budapest, and the reason that this project is kind of, it has everything. It has ornament, it has literal, it has grotesque, it's kind of contamination, it has part of the reality. It's a project, it's one of the few I still find like it's a source of inspiration for us as we move forward. The building will not move. That was just, we did it for the movie. But there was something, this desire about the layering of the things and this idea to add dirtiness, even though in this case it doesn't have flowers and other things, but they have these metal panels outside that they will protect these other elements. And yeah, leave it on. It's not so important for this, but for the last. One hour, as I promised. More than 1 hour. You guys will walk away. Anyway, the movie goes on and on. So this, I still like to spend time on this. I mean, I'm the one who construct the camera and all those things. And I like to play with that part a lot. But in any case, to wrap it up, and there is one more thing I think after this, but this is Kate Richard now, 78 years old, still going. And in a way, it's a nice symbol in the sense of, at the end of the day, the Rolling Stones keep doing what they've always been doing. So at the end of the day, the idea is always the same. You keep doing it, you keep acquiring certain things, and you keep doing it again and again. And eventually, it gets a little bit better just by doing it. So I really believe in that idea that do first, think after. I do, because I think you have a much better chance to succeed. So, sorry, I need to do the commercial. So you guys, when you get tired of this great school, come to another one. We have many of you. But I want to...
Hernán, we take a few questions?
Sure.
Are there any?
Yes. Are you saying hi or you want to ask a question? Okay.
What kind of programs are you using for your animations?
Is mostly Maya centric, but we use a lot of ZBrush, and now Maya have a lot of plugins about that. We still use Rhino to decode some of the things into it, and still you have to use AutoCAD, unfortunately, to do plans and section, because most of the construction people are not up to speed. We do a lot of After Effects and a lot of movie editing and all that too. We use any software that came out, we test it. 3D Max? I never used 3D Max. I mean, I come from a time that was Alias Studios and then became Maya or 3D Max. So I was always in the other camp. But it's pretty cool too. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the lecture.
Sure.
How do you find this kind of clients?
I don't have that many clients.
They are finding you.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have some clients, we have patrons more than clients. We have people that they like your stuff and they want to sponsor to do certain things. Some others come to friendship, like the guy who's running the Infonavit is a good friend, and he wanted to do something different. And my position is we work on any problem that people ask. In a way, I'm a very conventional architect in that sense. All of the projects I show you, none of them we make it up. None of them is a research project. They all were a competition or a client or a museum. Somebody asked to think about it. I don't know, you should ask them. But we don't get that many clients. We get like once a year. And usually the project doesn't fly. But we keep the lights on in the office. So I don't know. At the end of the day, look, you have to stick to what you believe. I was mentioned, I don't know if you were in the afternoon of the conversation, I was mentioned to some of your classmates or you were there, and I'll repeat that. I always tell the story. In 91, in Argentina, Zaha Hadid came to the Biennale to talk. This is the only thing that she had at that time, was a small interior restaurant in Japan. And I remember I was fascinated by her work and whatever, so I was trying to copy her. And I remember one of the guest architects said, "Oh, don't do that, she never built anything, whatever." So I bumped into him 25 years later, and I look at him and say, "Yeah, remember?" And the thing that you learn, and I've been lucky enough to become close friends with people like Zaha Hadid and Wolf Briggs and Frank, all those guys, and you ask them, how you get clients, how you do your thing, and they all tell you, I have no idea. I did what I did, and eventually, somebody trusts me with the first one, then you prove that you can do it. Now, when we did PS1, and we were lucky, we were in the cover of the New York Times art section, that day the New York Times came out, I had 5 clients by the end of the day. Within 2 weeks, they were 5 to 2. Within a month, it went down to 1. And within a year, it went down to 0. If some of those guys wouldn't go the extra mile, who knows? There are moments in everybody's career, there are moments that you are, but at the end of the day, you have to hold to your guns, how the Americans said, and hope for the best. So I mean, sometimes you go for it. I mean, sometimes you core things. I mean, I have this couple of ideas about fashion, so I went and I pitched to a couple of people that won't pay for it. You do that too, but I don't know. People, I mean, it's a big world out there. There are enough of people that are interested in doing things. So anybody who's done anything interesting, they were in the same position than I am or you will be. Like you struggle, you don't have work, and somebody come along and give you a chance, and then you have to prove and deliver that you can do it, and after that, whatever. But also, in the American context, in Europe it's different because there is a little bit more opportunity for younger architects. But in America, I'm going to be 50 this Sunday. I'm just starting. You're a young architect until very late in America. So many of the people that I admire the most, they didn't get the really thing going until they were mid-50 to 60. I mean, all of them. Like Kopp Himmenblau, the only thing they had for years was that roof in Vienna until they got the museum in Groningen. But by then already Wolf was like 54, 55. I'm not comparing myself to them. They're way better than I am. I'm just saying, who knows? I mean, why? It's funny because once in a while somebody comes and says, I love your work, whatever, and they start talking, and I said, you want to do what? And they want to do like a simple house. And say, why the hell you come talking to me? Like, I can give you the name of 10 friends that they will do a beautiful box for you. So you have that too. Like, but most of them, they come for, well, they look at whatever. I don't know. I don't get them when they come to, yes?
Can you please elaborate on why you think the small fonts?
Why I'm not interested in? I'm not interested. Why I'm not?
Yeah, no, because like you said, if you ask me later why I think that font is not fonts.
No, what I said is I can prove to you that a big fundamental argument of modernism and the form follow function is partially bullshit. Barcelona Pavilion. The Farnsworth House. Ronchamp. Ville Savoie. What do they have in common? Nobody ever lived and used them. They were just, people couldn't live there. The guy who commissioned the Ville Savoie for Le Corbusier never managed to live there. There's a famous house of Le Corbusier in Argentina, in La Plata, called Curuchet House. He did it for a guy who was a dentist and also designed dentist tools. Rich guy. So they finished the house. He lived for a month, buy the house next door, move him and his family to the house next door, and leave the Curuchet empty because he recognizes a masterpiece, but he cannot live in it. I'm just saying aesthetics and the comprehension of cultural understanding is what make those things. I'm not saying that they don't function. I'm just saying what captivates imagination on everybody's about those things, it have nothing to do with the idea of functionality. It have to do that it represented a new form of life. It represented a new culture. It represented a new society. And it was driven to a completely different alien aesthetic at the time. So the form follow function I never found interesting. That doesn't mean I'm arguing that you should do projects that they don't function. I'm just saying a project is not good because it's functions well. You know what I mean? A hospital functions well, that doesn't make it a good architecture. Airports function well, that doesn't make it interesting architecture. It's not enough. It should be required. But also, if you apply for the rest of other things in life, you will find out that most of the people accept that. Like, I don't know, your generation not so into cars anymore, but my generation, we were into cars. So let's say a Kia or a Nissan, that's exactly the same than a Porsche 911. They take you from point A to B, and by now, they all have Bluetooth, security, all that same shit. But everybody knows that Porsche 911 is way cooler than a Kia. It has to do with aesthetic, it has to do with aspiration, it has to do with a bunch of other things. So functionality is very limited in terms of the creation of desire. So I'm not saying it's not important, of course it has to function. But at the end of the day, I would argue also to make a building work and function is not that difficult. It's not that difficult. I can show you in an afternoon how to do a perfect plan for a house because I spent 6 years of my life in Argentina doing that. They told me, it's not really that difficult. You just make sure that the door of the bathroom doesn't open into the living room. Trust me, if it was that difficult, not so many corporate architecture will be building everywhere. So you can go to any of these generic office buildings here in Frankfurt. I guarantee you, they all function well. They all function well. but you forget 2 minutes after you walk by. I'm not saying that everybody should be doing what I do. No, by any means. I always say that what I do is like salt. Eating food without salt is not that interesting, but eating just salt is way worse. So I'm not saying that the whole city needs to be done a thing. I'm just saying if you are in a solid, rational, minimalist approach to architecture, do it well. Give that extra plus. Like I mean, Herzog and de Meuron are not my cup of tea, but they're phenomenal architects. And now they do more funky things, but at the beginning they were like really an extreme refinement, rethinking, re-elaboration on the modernist minimal project. But they didn't just copy Mies van der Rohe. They came and brought a whole other thing to the table. So that's worth all the respect of all of us. But you have to aspire to more. Like, it's not, but again, it's not different than food. When you go to McDonald's, it's functional. It gives you whatever you need, it gives you more calories than you need and all that, but it basically keeps you going. But it's not the same thing to go to a restaurant or some that know how to cook and they cook a proper meal. So functionality, to me, is highly overrated in architecture. I'm not saying that it's not important. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not saying that you should not pay attention to it. I'm just saying I don't think it's the driving force in a project. And the reason I know that is because after the Philharmonic of Sharon, every Philharmonic in the world copied the plan of the concert hall because he figured it out, the perfect acoustic and so on. So architects stopped worrying about that and they start worrying about something else. So I think that's what I'm saying. Functionally, it's overrated, and it was overrated in the modernism too. It was overrated. Those guys, Mies van der Rohe was an ornamental guy, believe it or not. If you go look at the Sigram building, half of the stuff that you look is doing nothing. It's just there to produce a rigor geometrical order, which is great. I love it. But it's built on a lot of myth. And I think it's okay. I mean, at some moment, the cliches became cliches for a reason, and slogans are powerful for a reason. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's so interesting. Like, I don't know. The LG smartphone does the same thing than an iPhone. I have an iPhone. It's better designed. The interface is nicer. I like it better. Function is exactly the same thing. So that's my whole argument. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying don't put too much. But you are in the Staedelschule, so you guys are not really putting that much investment into functionality anyway. What the hell are we talking about? It's not like we're in the Polytechnic or something. So if you worry about that, you're in the wrong place. Yeah.
What will be like the difference between having your office at the U.S. and having an office in China? Like, how do you feel?
I have no clue. I don't know. I mean,
Is it the same thing?
No, it's not. I mean, not every it's completely different places. But I would not be whatever I am without my 20 years in America and 20 years of the speculative thinking approach of education in some institutions in America, which I don't think you find in many other places. So China or India or other places, there is an opportunity because people are fearless. So there are opportunities to do things. But there's a lot of political problems. I mean, there are certain things that it give you conflict in your head that you want to be operating in a society that have those issues and so on. But at the human level, there is a level of fearlessness and a level of that can be done that at some moment was here and some moment was in America that doesn't seem to be the norm anymore. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not planning to have an office in China. I'm planning to have a fashion collection in China. And if it works, I will do it everywhere else. But right now, the deal is only belong to China because there are people crazy enough to invest money into it. But I mean, as an architect, you go wherever people ask you. I mean, you don't have much of a choice. But you have choices. There are certain places that you should not work, or for certain clients you should not work. But it's a difficult conversation to have. But I don't know what is the difference, honestly. I think most of the offices I know in China, they're like any other office. The difference is I saw in China younger architects getting ahead and getting their hands on projects that you will not get anywhere else. But Chinese architects. Foreign architects, you have to have like a super stardom status. But I don't know enough. I mean, my office is me and 2-3 guys. So it's not like we have a lot of commercial commissions, or I have no experience about that, and I will not claim to have it and to know the difference. But for sure, they seem different. To a point. I really don't think the world is that different as we think it is. I mean, I don't know, maybe because I travel a lot. I feel at home pretty much anywhere in the world. So I think there is a lot of difference, but I think what makes people common with the chairs are much more. So especially today, then we can argue the good things about and bad things about globalization, but clearly has created a level of comfort when you move. I think the difference right now is not so much between countries and culture, it's more about between city and rural. I think if you're in a big city, there's a lot of common ground that you find right away. So I don't think it will be that different to have an office in China. But again, I would not call what I have a true functional office, so I wouldn't know. Yes?
Thank you for the lecture, first of all.
You're welcome.
My question...
You mean it?
Yes.
Okay. No, because people always say that to be polite. So if you think me mean it, it's fine. If you don't, it's fine.
No. It was very interesting and eye-opening. And my question would be to the counterposition that you mentioned in the beginning, technology versus craft. And at least from my point of view, there seems to be a division, for lack of a better word, between the part of architecture that is more retrospective in a sense, and the one that is more medium specific in the digital sense, right, and follows this digital zeitgeist. So my question would be, do you also observe this from your...
well, I'm not that height, I'm fairly short.
I mean also from your position in SCI-Arc, in academia. And if it exists, is it a temporary thing? Is it a new status quo? Do the retrospective architects have to just wake up or smell the digital?
Well, I agree. I agree with your diagnosis. At the same time, I wouldn't worry that much. I think it's always has been that about architecture. I mean, architecture is one of the most subjective disciplines out there. We were talking this afternoon how from all the canonic careers, engineer, medicine, law, architecture is the only one who still remains a single one. All the other ones are split into multiple things. Ours is not. So I think that issue always has been. Also, I don't buy too much into the digital argument because before it was called pencil architecture, triangle architecture, compass architecture. I don't know. I mean, I think every technological revolution produces a change. You will not have modernism without the Industrial Revolution. You will not have modernism without steel and glass. So technology takes many shapes and form. So I think the digital is just what's our common life now. And I think I honestly, for example, in SCI, we never ever talk about digital architecture. It's just the thing we do. I mean, these are the tools that you have, and that's what you do. We don't ride horses anymore. You use buses. So, well, unfortunately, we're going back to bicycles, which is a tragedy. But I think technology never goes back. I mean, I think at the same time, every creative field will always find a way to be retrograde and be looking back and trying to be nostalgic and try to be hipster by nostalgia, which I hate. So I think part of the thing is just being nostalgic, and certain people are just, to me, technology and the digital thing is just part of the now, is what I was telling you. It's part of is what we are. I mean, it's like, we don't use pigeon with messages anymore, you use your phone. So now nobody, but most of people don't carry cameras anymore, and they became part of your life. And some moment it's just, I'm pretty sure most of you cannot remember before smartphones. I remember the flip phones and whatever. So it eventually became part of your life, and it just goes. I don't know. In architecture, we seem to be always this idea of the nostalgia, and we had to fight all the time these issues. You're right in your diagnostic, but my suggestion will be, who gives a fuck at the end of the day, right? I mean, there are people who like to go to Starbucks, there are people who like to go on coffee connoisseur. People like to go to flea markets.
So you would say it will, although the field is changing drastically, it will still stay within, even if the divide exists a little bit? And
the divide would always exist.
It will still exist within the field of architecture. It's the emergence of a new kind of discipline which will deal more with virtual reality.
I think already that's happening. I mean, I was mentioned today that my interest is not so much in architecture these days, it's much more in architectural thinking. I think that we are seeing the birth of new professions that are fueled by architectural thinking and architects, but it's not necessarily buildings. Have to do with a bunch of other things. And also I see the corporate world of architecture absorbing many of these things and absorbing some of the talent. And then academia will react and will keep pushing how to innovate. So I think that cat and mouse game will never end. But also, to be fair, is also market capitalism reality. The moment the technology becomes more viable, that's how it goes. I mean, the same way that Mike Boucher yesterday was saying that he cannot find any glass bottle blower in Germany left. He had to go to some other country. So there's a lot of things that disappear, and we don't notice disappear because technology replaces them. So, you know, like when I was a kid, my father was a businessman. He didn't buy his suits in Armani or Zegna or Louis Vuitton. He had a tailor. Who goes to a tailor these days? Old people. So, I don't know. I think about the things with somebody that you ask me and we talk about it, but usually it's more like, you know, it's organic. Things keep moving and take care of themselves. And the moment that the industry figured out they can 3D print glass tower banks, they will 3D print glass tower banks. So, I don't think it's going to happen in 2 years, but you know, it's like now. I mean, you go to a doctor; they do an MRI. They don't. There's a great show you should guys watch if you haven't, called The Nick. It's the beginning of modern surgery, and this is only 1901, 1905. If you have an appendicitis at the time, you die. It was like that. It's only 120 years. So if you think the evolution of things and what becomes common knowledge and common practice, which is architects, for some reason, we are the only one who keep looking at these things in historical context. What does it mean? Whatever. In industrial design, in fashion, in car design, they don't look at any of that shit. I mean, they look for inspiration, but they move forward with the technology. No car will come today without Bluetooth. No car will come today without touching a screen. It just is. So we are the only one we keep questioning, whatever, because we still are in the idea that architecture had to be timeless. By the way, another bullshit argument. The Bill Savoy is great because you know it was done in 1929. Because there's a lot of Bill Savoy and funds were built out in Dwell magazine, and nobody gives a shit. Because it doesn't mean anything today to do a modernist house. So people like it, whatever, it's fine, but the idea is that you go to the Delphine Tower and you marvel because you know what it was done. So the cultural context and the time that things happen matters. It matters big time. Like, I got to see the Stones because I'm nostalgic, because with music, we are nostalgic. You absorb new music until you're 30. After that, you listen to new music to see what's going on, but the music that you like is the music that you absorb when you were younger. But if you really want to go to see what music scene is, you don't want to go to see the Rolling Stones or U2 or whatever. You go to see a DJ or you go to see whatever, a performing artist. It's the same thing, but architecture, for somehow, we always keep debating these things. We keep debating these things. In the rest of things, I mean, like, nobody will think that going to listen to Mozart symphony is contemporary. Nobody will think that. Everyone understands it's classical music. It has cultural relevance. We know why. It's called the classicals because they invented the classical. They were not classical before them. But I don't know. I mean, again, by all means, the people who are into it, I respect that and I love them for it. It's just not my thing.
What are your views on commercialization of design?
I have no clue. If I knew, I would be more successful. No, I truly don't. I have no idea. I'm trying to learn a little bit now, but If you figure it out, send me an email. I figured I had to commercialize it and to have a good academic life. But I don't know. The only thing I will say, there's nothing wrong with being commercially successful if you do it in your terms. I don't think that that's selling out. I think it's selling out if you do something that you don't want to do for money. But the people want to buy and you can do the thing that you want to do and people are paying for it, it's great. It's totally cool. You want to find an audience. Depends what you want to do. Like I always said, I'm very happy being Tom Waits. I have no interest in to be Taylor Swift. Now, I want to make a living at what I do, so Tom Waits fills theaters everywhere, so he have a good living. But he's not Taylor Swift in terms of commercial success. But there's nothing wrong with being looked to be a commercial success. Everybody who does a creative work, you want to find an audience. The question is how much you're willing to compromise. I haven't figured out that part. Yeah.
There are a lot of people that want to make money out of that. So is there just going on a discussion about how to make this viral or how to make it?
Well, sure. I mean, as I said, you want to make a living out of what you choose to do every day of your life, right? I mean, each of us, we do this every day. So, of course, you want to. The thing is, being an architect is not a good practice to make money. Even the most commercial architects, they do well, but they don't do equally well to other people who do other things. It's a longer conversation how we got there, how we get bad play, the fee that you get, all the responsibilities. So it's a very complex problem, and I don't think it's going to be solved. Actually, I think this is it. This is the status quo. But at the same time, I feel optimistic because I think there are all new opportunities and new territories that architects can find a way to make money and to do things. And again, the reason why I think to figure out how to make money is what I said this afternoon, because intellectual freedom comes with money. So if you have to pay the bills and you're going to do whatever you need to do, but if you find a little level of comfort, you're going to manage to do good stuff. There's no way around. They've always been like that. The creative world always need patrons, clients. You need to have it. There's a fundamental difference between, look, an artist needs a buyer. But you're an artist, you can be painting your studio, you do your thing, and eventually maybe you get lucky, you're good, and somebody will buy it. As an architect, you don't have that luxury. You're always working with somebody who gives you the problem. So from the get-go, it's a commercial activity. Whoever thinks otherwise is delusional. It is a commercial activity because you need to have a client. You need to have a problem. A client could be a competition, a client could be a museum, but it's a commercial activity. It's not an altruistic bohemian thing. It's a commercial activity. They're saying that the doctor is a commercial activity. Don't get me wrong. Nobody gets to be a doctor to be rich. They want to save people, but it's part of the game. If you don't get the money, you cannot do research, you cannot advance it. So until we have a different system that replaces capitalism, that's what we have. So the only thing I'm saying is you guys are young guys, try to educate yourself in alternative models how to develop, so you can control what you want to do. This is one of the most interesting, I always said that Frank Gehry always talk about it. When you talk to him, he's obsessed. He has total control. When you hire him, he gives you everything, even engineering. He charges a very high fee. He charges more than the double than a regular architect. But he tells the client, you're not going to have any extra fees. I'm not going to bill you later. You give me this money, I'll take care of the project from A to Z. And he figured out how to do that. He also figured out the way how he negotiate and navigate his own structure of his office, but also he's obsessed about the insurance system. So he understands all the pieces of the game. He's not just a visionary architect with amazing talent. He's also a super savvy guy who understands how the world operates. So I didn't learn that, and just this is my crusade this day when I lecture. I remind the people, pay attention to that, because you want to have an audience, you want to have clients, you want your thing to be out. It's a phenomenal feeling when some of your thing gets realized. And also, do not sell your ideas for free. Architects, we are only idiots And you will see that you're doing a house for a client or a friend, whatever, and the guy say, you want to do some weird thing in the corner. And the guy say, I don't have money. Many I know will say, you know what, pay me less, but let me do it. So if you're good at something, like the Joker says in the second Batman, if you're good at something, don't do it for free. Never. So any project I do, anybody say, I want to do this, great. Wire $10,000 in my account and we'll do something. No, but I don't know yet. I don't care. I will not think 1 second until we don't do that. Okay, screw you. To work for free, I work for free for me. I do art pieces, I do competition, whatever. But if you want a client, never, ever work for free. Ever. Like even in my academic life, when I was doing all the visiting thing he was talking, somebody will call me and say, hey, you want to come and teach here next year? I'll give you whatever. My first question will be, how much are you going to pay me? And the guy will say, what? Dude, if we cannot agree how much you're going to pay me, let's don't waste 1 hour talking. This is the thing I love about being in America for 20 years. I learned that lesson. Don't be, Europeans are much more complicated. Asians are incredibly complicated. I don't give a damn. I told them, how much you're going to pay me? This is what I want. We cannot agree on that. See you. That's the freedom that gave me the academic life in America. Being the director of the school, in SCI-Arc, which I love, it's fun. I get to choose whatever I want to do. But I figured it out. I didn't figure it out how to be commercial with my practice, but I figured it out how to make money so I can get my practice to do whatever I want. I thought about it. I prepared for it. I networked for it. You have to. You have to learn. Don't get only in the other cool part. One more, or we're going for, yes?
What kind of other training projects is a person who graduated from architecture components and
Oh! The head of Samsung Research Design, SCI-Arc graduate. The head of the digital department Nike, SCI-Arc graduate. 3D print food. I have a couple of graduates who did that. A lot of people in Hollywood, architects. Fashion designers, Tom Ford, Virgil Abloh, architects. The whole advertising industry in Madison Avenue in the 50s was born out of architecture. They were all architects. We are experts in being generalists, and that is a commodity that the rest of the world is losing. We're going to a world of expertise and expertise and expertise and expertise. I'm telling you, we have on a regular basis 4 or 5 major companies, I'm not going to tell you who, they come to SCI-Arc and they say, we want to do something with you guys. What are you going to do? We don't know. That's why we want to work with you. We don't know what the future is about this. So we want you guys to think outside the box about this. So architecture, science, and math is going to rule. Architecture, liberal arts, but architecture particularly. And you will do professions that we don't even know that exist yet. So you can do pretty much anything you want to do. Filmmakers. Joel Kosinski, the guy who did Oblivion. Okay, he's not a great filmmaker, but filmmaker. So Pink Floyd, architects. Roger Waters, David Gilmour. So on and so forth. So I mean, you have a body of knowledge and a way to understand the world, cities. Everybody's obsessed about cities. The future of the world is in cities. And cities, whatever you do, real-time data, whatever it is going to need architects to think and reflect on it. But also, if you love buildings, go for it. There's going to be plenty of buildings. I'm going to tell you a scary number. It's not good architecture. But in the last 25 years, there has been more built things, square meters in the world than in the previous 150. It's a lot of shit, not many good ones. But opportunities, there are plenty. So if we put our spirit and try to change and educate corporations and clients and so on, that something else can be done. And this is what technology can help on digital thing. Eventually, this Pinus production, I mean, many of the projects I show you, they didn't go forward. It's not because the client hated it. 9 out of 10, they love it. It was too expensive. It was too difficult to fabricate. So as technology evolves, the opportunities keep going to keep expanding and expanding and expanding. So it's limitless, man. Limitless. Believe it or not, it doesn't feel like that now, but you choose one of the best careers moving forward. Not so good right now. But if you survive the next 4 or 5 years and you're smart and you think, plenty of opportunities.
And it's a great optimistic tone too.
Yeah. What else are we going to do?
Yeah. Hernán, thank you so much.